The truth is out there. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be my review of Season 1, Episode 9 of The X-Files. It is called Space. So, this one is set in NASA, primarily mission control and, the rest of the sort of surrounding area. And it's about sabotage in the space program. Specifically, the space shuttle's going up for missions. Colonel in charge of the space program, who at the start of the episode we see some stock footage of him in the 70s coming back from a successful mission, which made me chuckle a little bit because I felt like the hair they gave him in this like flashback and in this sort of really shitty looking stock footage, which I feel like they did, one, to make it look time appropriate, but also to match the rest of the stock footage they were using, because obviously all the shots of the space shuttle and the launch and all that were all stock footage. So the gap in image quality from that and like the rest of the episode, which has all been restored in high definition, it was quite drastic. I'm sure it was always a bit of a difference, but it is more, accentuated now. But I laughed though because the reporter like says, "Hey, here's a photo of this creepy looking face on Mars." It's just like a bit of some dunes and some rocks that kind of make a human face. And she asks about it. He's like, this is a complete just anomaly. There's nothing but winds and rocks and shit. There's nothing." But the way his demeanor, and I don't know if it's because the actor's got a very kind of manly face and the hair they've given him in the flashback, but he kind of sounded like he was in the mob. And he was saying, "If you ask me another question about this face on Mars, I'll break your effing legs." Like, that was the vibe I was getting from this guy, even though it was a TV interview. Not that he came off as aggressive necessarily. There was just something about his body language, something about probably his accent more than anything else. He had kind of not a New York accent, but I don't know, something. He had something. I don't know. It was the vibe I was getting from him. But yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of a preamble, and it turns out he's been haunted by this spirit, and it has the same face that we see on the Mars photograph. And we see it kind of form on his face, making it clear that he's kind of possessed at various points in the episode, and we actually see it leave his body at one point. But he's sabotaging missions, and one of the other people who work at Mission Control leak an x-ray of sabotaged equipment to Mulder and Scully, and that's what gets them on board and investigating. A lot of this episode is Mission Control kind of like crisis mode, right? So there's a lot of like something's gone wrong on the shuttle and they're making decisions in the room to deal with it. And this has kind of mixed results in this episode, because I quite like some of the concept. As much as a space ghost sounds a little bit silly, obviously maybe you can just take it as like an alien entity that's not corporeal. It's more of just like a spirit-based life form, effectively. But some of those visuals are really interesting and are handled relatively creepily at points. They do a couple of interesting things with it. But a lot of the actual time in the episode is spent with Mulder and Scully just watching as the NASA plot plays out. And you've got this Colonel Belt making these decisions that, might be dodgy, they might not be, but they're very passive for a lot of the big scenes. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I think it's also one of the limitations of this episode is that we never really feel like we can just like show something that we should show. And that's not to say that you can't do this type of episode written in a way where it's very compelling, despite the fact that you never see the space shuttle, despite the fact that you never see the men who are in danger on the space shuttle of either crashing or exploding or whatever it may be. But I really felt in this episode like it was limited by the fact that all we have is some stock footage, and otherwise we're just going to spend all of our time in the Mission Control. And I think the reason why I felt it was because of how poorly defined some of the things that were going on were. One of the big things is that they keep talking about the mission, the shuttle has to deliver its payload. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I missed it, please tell me in the comments if I did. I don't think they ever said what the mission was, or what the payload is. They just kept vaguely saying, we've got to deliver the payload. If we don't deliver the payload, the NASA program could be in jeopardy. What is the payload? I don't know. If there was a small moment where they actually said it, I missed it. But it was kind of starting to really annoy me later in the episode when things were getting tense, and it felt like the colonel is putting the payload above the people who are on the ship. And the woman who works at Mission Control, who's working with Mulder and Scully, her fiance is the pilot of the ship, so she's got a personal vested interest, which is a writing technique. It's trying to make you care more about the people on the ship by having someone who's directly connected to them to react to everything that's going on, to get emotionally invested in, typical stuff. So I think that was an issue, and I think the other issue is how vague the actual like alien entity is, or like what it's. So it reveals late in the episode, right? As Mulder and Scully are investigating things and looking into records of other space missions and shuttle missions and specifically shuttle disasters, and they even bring up the Challenger by name, and they say that this colonel was involved on that mission. He was in Mission Control or whatever at that time, and they're kind of saying he's been sabotaging things for years. And of course, as we find out over the episode, is that it's not really him. He's possessed by this space ghost, which is doing all this. And if anything, the theory at the end from Mulder is that deep down he intentionally leaked this to the woman who works at Mission Control because he wants to save the astronauts. He doesn't want the mission to fail. He wants it to all go through. But the questions that's kind of raised for me as I was watching this, it was two things. One is this ghost or spirit or alien entity like only sabotaging ones he's involved in? Because as we see in this episode, this spirit leaves his body when it wants, and it goes up and sabotages the shuttle directly. It doesn't need to do it while it's at Mission Control or while it's at the launch pad or wherever it may be. It can just fly off and do it anytime it wants. So is it not sabotaging other missions that Colonel Bell isn't involved in? If not, why? Why this mission? Why the missions that he's more directly tied to? The general gist that Bell, as he's like sort of dying, and well, technically he survives and ends up being okay, but then commits suicide at the end of the episode. But whilst we think he might be dying, and he's lying there on the stretcher, and he's saying to Mulder, "Oh, he doesn't want us to know. He doesn't want us to know about them." It never quite tracked with me how frequently this ghost is sabotaging these missions, especially if it's only ones that he himself is tied to, when I don't understand why it wouldn't just do it. And also, like, what is it afraid of them seeing exactly? Well, it's because all they're doing is going up and delivering a payload. And again, I'm not really sure what the payload is. Like, supplies for the International Space Station? Maybe, but that is a bit of a reach. I'm just pulling that out of my ass. I'm not really sure, because they never go anywhere. They're not going to Mars. They're not going anywhere far away. They're just in orbit. The entire time, the furthest they go is orbit of the Earth. So I'm not really... I can't really quite decipher why this space ghost is so adamant to sabotage this mission. Unless it just wants to shut down NASA, by sabotaging things enough that the government and the country will stop funding NASA, which, okay, that makes enough sense, I guess, but it's only been sabotaging the ones that Bill's associated with. Like, some of it just felt a little bit poorly defined to me, and it did kind of hamper like the stakes as it was going on. I mean, we have the obvious stakes of the astronauts who are on the shuttle and like bringing them back down safely, and that's just typical space program drama. I really did feel hampered in the episode by kind of like, I don't expect them to explain what the space ghost is. Obviously, I don't expect them to go into too much detail on that, because I get that part of the fun here is the mystery of it being ambiguous and like, oh, what was that really? What was his intentions? But its actions that we do know about don't really quite add up to create a coherent whole. They feel, like I say, just poorly defined to me. So I think that's like a weaker element of the episode. And it's a shame, because it does kind of overall make me feel kind of negative on it as a complete package. Because I do actually really like some of the individual moments or individual ideas that are in here. I think whenever the Colonel Bell like has these flashbacks to when he was an astronaut in space, when he first encountered this spirit, especially towards the end when you see kind of the full version of it where he's floating there in space and this spirit like comes up to him while he's in, he's outside doing a spacewalk, and this spirit kind of is in front of him. I actually think that moment's really creepy and cool. In this moment where he chooses to commit suicide at the end in the hospital, he just jumps out the window, and the way it sort of like cuts between him falling slowly to his astronaut time, and it's sort of cutting backwards and forwards. I thought all that done was very effective. The idea that he actually did really deep down, the real person cared about these astronauts and cared about the space program, and wanted to like make sure this entity could never like sabotage anything again. His plan was to commit suicide. I mean, I guess the thing had to keep going back to him as a tether. Like it basically had to it was like fused to him, even though it could leave, it had to maybe come back. Because otherwise, him dying to like stop it doesn't really make much sense. Otherwise, it could just fly off and pick someone else. For seemingly, we're led to believe that it just can't do that, and that it's died with him at the end of the episode. And when I say we're led to believe that, I mean the tone, the way the episode handles the moment gives me that impression. It doesn't really give me a good reason why. But the actual moment is effective in how it's done, as is any time where you see his face change, and it happens in front of some people when he's having his panic attack and his blood pressure's going up and they're trying to get him to the hospital. Like Mulder sees it. Although Mulder does risk his life by like not letting him be sedated. He's like, no, I need answers here, damn it. I need to know. I need them to tell me things. I did appreciate that Mulder is a nerd for space program stuff and knows some of the astronauts. Him and Scully just kind of like, the early parts of the episode where they're getting like effectively a tour around NASA. They're on the little cart. They meet the colonel for the first time, and Mulder's kind of geeking out. He's kind of into it. He's bringing up facts about space and space missions as he sees, posters or photographs on the wall. That's all quite endearing. It kind of fleshes out his character a little bit. It makes sense that he was into this, given that he's into aliens. This is kind of the furthest we've gotten as civilization, as far as we know, into that realm. So it makes sense that he'd be fascinated by it. Scully's gives him the cold shoulder about it, which is, entertaining. Their chemistry, as ever, is solid enough. But these moments are, they're relatively fleeting, and they're kind of sprinkled throughout an episode that largely is made up of the mission control drama. It's something's wrong on the space shuttle, and decisions need to be made about how to help them. And there's conflict between the colonel who's making the decisions and the fiancée who works in mission control, who is, putting the safety of the astronauts first, where it feels like Bell is trying to... Well, in the moment, it feels like he's putting the payload and the mission first, but obviously later on, maybe you suspect that he's just wanting a disaster to happen, or at least the entity that's inside him wants a disaster to happen. And that's all very fine, but we spend a lot of time in these sequences. Sometimes there's a little bit of extra drama because the colonel's not there yet, and they need his expertise. And to go along with that idea that he was like deep down kind of like reaching out and trying to like tell someone about these problems by giving the x-rays of the sabotage parts to the woman who works there. I think going along with that, you have the idea that sometimes he is giving real advice. He is giving in fact at the end when they're carting away at the hospital, like he gives the advice to realign the trajectory of re-entry. And that saves the astronaut's life, seemingly. He is trying to, throughout the episode, maybe put in real valuable bits of information as well. Like he's fighting through the possession, if you will. The actual moments, though, these actual scenes where they're doing these problems, I mean, there's like 2 or 3 that really kind of take up a lot of the episode. I think there's a bit of an issue with the fact that Mulder is used to explain to the audience what's going on, because he's a nerd, right? And it's kind of endearing early on, but the way they use that as a writing technique once they get into mission control is every time there's a problem, he turns to Scully and explains, oh, this is what's happening and what might go wrong. He's constantly doing that throughout the episode, and it comes off a little bit like, they've only got 42 minutes, whatever, to do the story. They have to get this information out quickly, and they have to explain it, because if they don't explain it, we won't understand what the stakes are in the scene, and we have to understand those things. But because we don't have time to really establish it or have a good reason for anyone else to explain it. We just have Mulder turn to Scully and explain it to her because he just knows she doesn't understand. It's a little bit. I don't want to say lazy because it's not. I don't think it's laziness. I think it's this is how they've solved the problem. I just think it's very, very surface level, and there was probably a more interesting and natural way to deliver some of this exposition. I think it was fine to do it the first time they did it. It was like, okay, that was smart. They had Mulder turn, because he's a nerd, he knows what's going on. He turns to Scully and explains it. But then he does it several times throughout the course of the episode. And I think I constantly felt like they were having to explain the stakes to me every single time something went wrong. There was very few crises that came up in the episode where they just set it up smart enough earlier on that I instantly felt the excitement. I instantly felt the tension because I get it. You've set this up well enough that I understand the consequences of the current crisis that we're in. Obviously, some of them are easier to get than others. Scully even has a joke at one point where she says, "Even I understand what will happen if all the oxygen leaves the shuttle." I guess the way to sum it up is just to be. It felt stilted. It felt bogged down in exposition, and that the stakes were either constantly being explained to me in the moment as opposed to something I could just get because they'd set something up properly. Whereas last episode was a really good take on, oh, let's do our version of the thing. This being them doing their version of like a a NASA drama. It just wasn't as good at being the thing it was trying to be. And constantly kind of felt bogged down with all the techniques they were using to try and to write the episode. It wasn't quite working, which is a shame because some of the moments and concepts are kind of creepy. At one point, the spirit even tries to crash the car of the mission control lady when she's leading Mulder and Scully somewhere. It like comes out at her in the car, and she ends up flipping the car. So we get kind of a random. I say random because in hindsight it feels like a random thing just because we had to stretch out the runtime of the episode. It's like, oh shit, we've written the script. It's 3 minutes too short. What can we add in? Oh, maybe the spirit like tries to like kill the woman in the middle of the episode, which in the moment it felt fine because it felt like, oh, maybe it's going to start to do this. It's going to come after her. Maybe it'll come after Mulder and Scully. Maybe it'll start going on a kill spree to achieve its mission, but it never does. It never like attacks anyone else, and it never even tries to finish the job on her. It just that it is on its own in a vacuum. It tries to stop her, and it felt like it should have probably have kept trying because the idea is that, well, the Colonel has subconsciously or fought through the control to give her some information so that she can help fight against what the spirit's trying to do. So it makes sense the spirit wants to take her out of the picture to stop this opposition. But after it fails, it just never tries again. Maybe you could just say it's busy. I don't know. But it feels like I'm tacking this on at the end because like it's her being in a car accident halfway through. Other than just delaying them getting to somewhere, it doesn't really have much consequence. Like when they show up at NASA after this trip to go and help with the mission and what's going on, the only real consequence to it is that she has some blood on her forehead, and her co-worker at Mission Control just goes, "What happened to you?" And she's like, "I was in an accident. Let's move on." And it's never brought up again. It doesn't matter that she was in a car accident, that the spirit tried to kill her, other than just it delayed her a bit. So I don't know, like as a whole it feels like it's just like it needed a few more rewrites. It needed a few more passes to try and like really nail down what the through line of the story was, what the key points it wanted to make, and how it was going to make those key points. But more than anything, it needed to get Mulder and Scully perhaps a little bit more involved and be a bit more proactive, and I don't know, just generally not rely on the tropes that it relies on and doesn't do that well at doing. So yeah, kind of a weak episode overall, which is a shame because I thought, again, conceptually there was some fun ideas and some cool visuals or moments of direction here or there, but unfortunately I can't really say much more beyond that in terms of being positive. So there we go, that's space. I feel like my brain was doing weird jumping jacks trying to talk through that one. Mainly because I think it was just like as I was watching it, even I didn't feel like all of it pieced together very well, and not in a way that it was like an ultra confusing plot, just that it didn't all sit together as neatly as a well written narrative would. So trying to actually describe that feeling felt quite difficult there, but hopefully I got it across. Anyway, next episode is called Fallen Angel. Oh dear, we doing something biblical here? Here's the description on IMDb. The future of the X-Files project is jeopardized after Mulder secretly infiltrates the government cover-up of a UFO crash. Well, that doesn't really link into the title, obviously, but hey, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. It sounds like it might be an important episode, given that the X-Files itself is in jeopardy, but we'll see. So that is my thoughts on this X-Files. Let me know what you think in the comments of the episode, and of course, like, subscribe, all the usual things. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, but that is the review. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?